Monster Hunter Wilds tells a story about an ecosystem which hangs in a delicate balance. This balance has been intact for hundreds of years, but now a strange new predator has arrived to disturb it. So, in this video, we will try to figure out whether the biodiversity of Monster Hunter Wilds is actually in danger. To that end, I welcome you to the Forbidden Lands. But before we can spring into action, first we have to figure out what the hell biodiversity even is. To measure it, scientists use certain indices depending on the question being posed. Fans of the Omegaverse will be delighted to learn that two of the more commonly used measures are called alpha and beta diversity. There's also gamma diversity, but that one didn't fit into the joke. Anyway, because the names don't tell us much, let's get into it a little bit more. Alpha diversity, sometimes known as species richness, is a measure that indicates the number of different species in an area. Keep in mind that I am oversimplifying this a lot here, and there are more elaborate ways to approach this metric. Next, beta diversity compares the number of species that are unique to each ecosystem. Once again, I will oversimplify this one later when I pull up the spreadsheet. Lastly, gamma diversity is simply defined as the product of alpha and beta diversity. More often, scientists use indices like the Simpson index or the Schaddn index. I will not use these later because they require population numbers instead of simple presence-absence data, but these would have been my preferred ones to use. Let me explain. The Simpson index D represents the probability that two randomly selected individuals from a habitat belong to the same species and ranges from 0 to 1. Let's say you had a chance of 1, meaning 100% probability of randomly pulling the same species from a hypothetical magic hat. You now know that the biodiversity is low. If diversity were high, you likely would have gotten a different species on your second pull. Also often used is the Shannon index H, which indicates the degree of uncertainty about the species that a randomly picked individual would belong to. The closer to 0 the Shannon index H goes, the less diverse is your sample. Now, let's take a look at our magic hat again. If there were only rabbits in the hat, we are quite sure that our next hat pull would result in a rabbit. However, if we now add some doves and mice into the hat, suddenly we are unsure as to what we could get on the next hat pull, and exactly that situation means that we have a high diversity. Now that we know all that, let's assess the biodiversity in the Forbidden Lands. And because I am extremely lazy, I will restrict myself to alpha diversity and a measure of how unique the species makeup of each biome is. But now we run into a problem. Before we can go to calculate anything, we need data. And this is where the game wiki comes in clutch. Because rather than going to map out transects in game, I could simply consult the wiki for the locales of each monster. Unfortunately, I had to make some decisions here about what I count as a valid monster. I left out Omega Planades and Omega Micros from this census, because for reasons I won't spoil here in case you haven't played the game yourself, those two didn't feel like they should belong on this list. I also left out Nerscylla hatchlings, which, looking back, makes no sense at all. But you know what they say, it is what it is. Don't say that when you write an actual academic paper though. Moving on, here's the spreadsheet I compiled. And before you yell at me for using Excel, I wanted to get some value out of my Microsoft Office subscription since I never actually get to use Excel for anything. As I found out, that was for good reason. I pulled my hair out when I wanted to do some math on this data because something simple like counting how many true and false and unique entries we have for each group is hard in Excel. Turns out that using an economics tool for STEM applications makes the job harder than it had to be. But anyway, let's see the results. Monster Hunter Wilds has 53 large monsters, of which we counted 50 for this dataset. And looking at the alpha diversity, we can immediately see that the ruins of Wisteria and the Wounded Hollow are both quite high in that regard, each featuring almost half of all monsters, while all the other biomes are in the range of 13 to 16 monsters present out of 50. Next, I looked at the number of unique species. I counted a species as unique when it could only be found in one biome and nowhere else. Here, the numbers correlate well with the alpha diversity except for one blatant outlier, the Wounded Hollow with 0 unique species despite having a high species richness. But how can this be? Well, this finding is actually anything but outrageous because the Wounded Hollow isn't a real biome. It's more like an arena for the player to fight intense close-range battles with monsters, and this artificialness of the biome is well reflected in the data. Pretty neat. Next, I wanted to calculate the beta diversity, but that compares two biomes to each other, and I wanted a measure that compares the diversity of one biome to the rest. So I came up with my own, the Schaddn measure. Creative. I know. First of all, here's the formula. Now, let's go through its components. First, I divided the number of unique species by the alpha diversity. This way, we can gauge how unique the biome is in comparison to others. Next, I added the ratio of species richness of one biome to species richness of the whole area to the previous number. Finally, I normalized the value with the number 2, so I get a measure that spans the range of 0 to 1, where 0 means minimum and 1 means maximum diversity. Hypothetically, if a biome were to hit a Schaddn measure of 1, it would contain all possible species of the greater area, of which all would be unique to this biome. And with all these measures, we can start to see that the most diverse area in Monster Hunter Wilds can be found in the ruins of Wisteria, with second place going to the Windward Plains. I feel like this result is satisfyingly fitting, since the Windward Plains are the first area you'll get to explore, whereas the final stretch of the story takes place in the ruins of Wisteria. Alright, if you do not want to get spoiled on parts of the main storyline, now is the moment to click away. That's because this segment deals with Arkveld, the title monster of Wilds. You see, in the story it is portrayed as this balance-upending apex predator preying on even the fiercest opponents without regard for the potential problems it will bring upon the lands. In short, Arkveld is an invasive species. Or is it? And is it even an apex predator? These kinds of questions are what I couldn't shake for the past few months, but I finally got to lay a few of them to rest. But before we can discuss my ideas, we will need some common ground on a few concepts. In the following part of the video, I will lean on ideas that come from a field called community ecology, which studies hierarchy and interactions of different populations in a larger community, hence the name. What we want to understand here is who depends on who to survive. To do this, we can rely on the concept of the food chain. It shows a sequence of food transfer through the so-called trophic levels, where each level consists of organisms that obtain their energy in a similar manner. Let's do an example with 3 trophic levels. We can start with our primary producers, plants. Plants receive their energy from sunlight and store it. The next level up from that are herbivores, which eat plants to get their energy. And of course, the next level up from that is occupied by carnivores, who prey on the herbivores to consume them to get energy. But of course, every time we transfer energy from one level to another, we get a loss of roughly 90%. This means that only 10% of the energy in plants goes to the herbivores, and only 10% of the energy in herbivores goes to the carnivores. That's why you typically expect smaller population numbers as you go up through a food chain. Now the question is, can we observe this behavior in Monster Hunter Wilds? And the answer is quite simple. Yes, we can. For example, in the Windward Plains, we can observe Doshaguma prey on Ceratanoth or Dalthodon. And the difference in pack sizes beautifully illustrate that rule of thumb of 10% energy transfer from one trophic level to the next. So with that in mind, we can expect a normal food chain. And every food chain has an entity that sits on top, the apex predator. Is it Arkveld? Indubitably, but not for the reason you might expect. It doesn't just feed on the number 2 in the chain, no. Arkveld is aggressive towards pretty much anything that moves, and it attempts to feed on monsters and the environment alike, as long as they contain elemental energy. And because of this behavior, because Arkveld attacks and consumes whatever it gets its chains on, that is why I think it deserves to be called the apex predator of Monster Hunter Wilds. But that leaves us with the other question. Is Arkveld an invasive species? To answer this, I have to preload you with an interesting piece of information first. Biological invasions on Earth today are mostly driven by human activities. That's because invasive is a relative term. To be invasive, a species must first be exotic. An exotic species is one that has been introduced to a region beyond the range of its own evolution. That alone doesn't make it invasive though. For example, if I were to try and plant a mango in Siberia, chances are it's not gonna make it. However, sometimes a species gets introduced to a habitat far away from home, which offers favorable environmental conditions and no natural predators. In this case, the exotic species can become an invader if it reproduces rapidly and displaces the native species. An example of that is the introduction of the cane toad to Australia. In 1937, roughly 62,000 of them were introduced as a means of pest control against the cane beetle, but they have spread out of control with an estimated population of over 200 million in 2011. Unfortunately, the cane toads outcompete the native species and are spreading all over Australia. But best of all, they didn't even reduce the number of cane beetles, the sole reason they were brought to Australia for, because they found other food they preferred. And because the cane toads have poison glands, for a long time there were no natural predators, although now, almost 90 years after their introduction, some successful predation events on the cane toad have been reported. But back to Arkveld. Is it exotic? Brought in by humans? The answer is a bit confusing. You see, Arkveld isn't simply exotic, no. It's a complete fabrication. In the lore of Monster Hunter Wilds, long ago an ancient civilization created artificial life forms to help and protect them. One of those creatures was Arkveld. And without spoiling too much, things have taken a wrong turn and Arkveld ended up in the wild. In my opinion, that certainly qualifies Arkveld as exotic. exotic. And under normal circumstances, that's where it would stay, because the guardian monsters know neither hunger nor the need for reproduction. But because things have gone out of hand in this story, our Arkwelt both eats prey and lays eggs. With its place at the top of the food chain, and now a means of reproducing, the foundations for Arkwelt to become an invasive species are certainly there, but will it? It is finally time to address the question this video was built around. Is biodiversity in Monster Hunter Wilds in danger because of Arkwelt? The answer that I came up with is no. Let me explain. The Wild Guardian Arkwelt is 100% capable of becoming an unstoppable danger to the environment if it was left alone. But the key word here is if. The arrival of the guild and the hunters in the Forbidden Lands means that things like a monster suddenly running rampant and taking over a region are not left unchecked, but investigated and stopped if it's deemed necessary. So it is my belief that humans created the problem in the first place, but just this once, they are also the ones that solve it. My name is Schaddn, and I hope I'll see you again next time. Goodbye.